Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Václav Havel, champion of the heart, builder of a nation. We are very honored today to have with us two dignitaries from the government of the Czech Republic. Mr. Peter Gandolovich, the ambassador of the Czech Republic in Washington, D.C., and the Consul General of the Czech Republic in New York, Mr. Martin Dvorak. Mr. Gandolovich will address us briefly now.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been the Czech ambassador to the US for almost 3 years, and I've been extremely proud representing my country in a country that I love above any other country, except of course my own. And more particularly, I've been so proud that I'm representing a country of Václav Havel, who has inspired so many people all around the world. And this inspiration has lasted. And always I see people coming from all different parts of the world, particularly those people who are living in still oppressed nations. As you know, recently the Cubans have been allowed to go out of the country, so we have had a unique opportunity this year to talk to dissidents who stood against the Cuban regime. And it was really moving listening to these people, to what extent Václav Havel has been their role model, their inspiration, and how his work has really done so much of a difference in their own thinking, what to do with their own struggle for democracy. So I'm extremely happy and proud that you are actually here to listen about Václav Havel's life and work from someone who had accompanied Václav Havel in the Charter 77 movement. So the right person to talk to you is not the ambassador, but it's my predecessor, Ambassador Martin Palous. And I again thank Communion and Liberation for doing this program, and I'm very much looking forward to it, as perhaps you do too. Thank you.
Before I turn over the microphone to Mr. Palous, I was asked to just give a little bit of context about the history of Czechoslovakia and the situation in which Mr. Havel was operating, and then we'll hear from Mr. Palous. So very briefly, just kind of sketching in broad strokes an outline of this place. Both Czech and Slovak nationalism began to grow during the 19th century. As in other parts of Europe, Romanticism spread. So too in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, in the various parts of what is today the Czech Republic and Slovakia, there began to grow the desire for autonomy. There was an increased emphasis on the Czech, Slovak languages, and a desire for representation in government. Indeed, during World War I, there were actually Czech nationalists who fought not with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but who fought with the Allies against Germany and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, hoping to win for themselves independence after World War I. And indeed, that's what happened. After World War I, Czechoslovakia was established. Of course, we know that just on the eve of World War II, Czechoslovakia was then abandoned and betrayed by the British and the French at the Munich Conference, perhaps the greatest example of appeasement to have ever taken place in history. And Hitler made Czechoslovakia part of his German Empire. And so the Czechs and the Slovaks suffered under Nazi domination for the entirety of the war. They were liberated in 1945 by the advancing armies of the Soviet Union. That happened in May of 1945. They entered Prague. And that initiated a new phase of history. It initiated the time of Soviet and communist domination in Czechoslovakia. It is into this world that Havel will live and work, and agitate and write and carry out his life. Of course, the Soviet Union established a single-party government. The only legal political party was the Communist Party, the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. Obviously, there were severely restricted personal freedoms, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the list goes on and on. There was a state control of education, state control of the press and all media outlets, state control of housing, state control of the economy, state control of healthcare, etc. In particular, during the reign in the Soviet Union of Joseph Stalin, the situation in Czechoslovakia and in the other Eastern Bloc nations was a situation of great difficulty and really great oppression by the government. As many of us know, at the death of Stalin and the election of Nikita Khrushchev to the Supreme Soviet leadership in the Soviet Union, there came about what is known as the thaw. The Soviet thaw took place in the late 1950s and the early 1960s. While Khrushchev started to indeed turn his back on Stalin and much of what Stalin had done, and publicly repudiate some of what Stalin had done. This led in Czechoslovakia to a loosening of control, in particular in the early 1960s, mid-1960s. And of course, in Czechoslovakia in 1968, there was something of almost a preview of what would happen in the Soviet Union in 1989 under Gorbachev. There was the Prague Spring, and many more personal freedoms were granted. There was even talk of establishing a two-party system instead of a single-party system. And all of this greatly upset the Soviet officials, who in 1968 sent in Soviet tanks along with tanks from other members of the Warsaw Pact. And so the movement was crushed, and what happened after that was a process of what was called normalization. And so the clock was turned back in Czechoslovakia, and much of the freedom that was gained, etc., was taken away, and the secret police became much more vigilant. Imprisonment, torture, secret arrests, secret trials, all of this became a matter of fact, in particular throughout then the early 1970s. Okay, that would end in 1989 as the entire situation in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe fell apart. We know largely because of the reforms of Mikhail Gorbachev, the presidency of Ronald Reagan, and of course the legacy of Solidarność in Poland and the election of John Paul II to the papacy. In Czechoslovakia, the transition from a communist state to a democracy is known as the Velvet Revolution. And Havel will be important, indeed a key figure, will play a key role in that revolution. Indeed, he'll serve as the president of the new Czechoslovakia. So just a little bit about Václav Havel. He was born in 1936 into what had been a historically aristocratic family in Prague. He attended a technical high school and only because he could not have, because of his aristocratic background, he was blocked from attending high schools that would have allowed him to study liberal arts, classical studies, etc. He took night classes in grammar in 1955. And in 1955 he began to publish literary essays, largely about the theater. On a number of occasions he attempted to join the faculty at the Prague Performing Arts Academy. First as a teacher of film, and then as a teacher of drama, but he was rejected on both occasions. And so in 1960, he took a job as a stagehand, forgive me for my Czechoslovakian or my Czech, in the Nad Zabridli Theater. The Nad Zabridli Theater. He then became, from stagehand, a literary advisor. And in 1963, he published, and there at that theater, his first play was performed. From 1963 to the mid-1980s, he wrote several plays, many of which then in the 1970s came out in samizdat, or secret editions. During the 1960s, he was involved in official Czechoslovak writers' associations. And then he also helped found unofficial associations with other writers who were chafing under the communist restrictions. In 1968, during the Prague Spring, he did radio broadcasts, letting people know what was happening on free Czech radio in August of 1968. In 1969, the secret police began to bug his apartment and to surveil him pretty much 24 hours a day. In 1975, he wrote an open letter to Gustav Husak, the General Secretary of the Czechoslovak Communist Party, and this gained him national fame in Czechoslovakia. And in 1976, he began discussions about what would become known as Charter 77, which was then signed by him and by other people, including Mr. Palous, on January 1st of 1977. That whole discussion was provoked by a number of things, including a public trial of a rock and roll band known as the Plastic People of the Universe. The Plastic People of the Universe was deeply influenced by the Velvet Underground, who of course were famous here in the United States at the time. Lou Reed just passed away, I believe, last week. He was the front man for the Velvet Underground, and so Mr. Havel and Lou Reed knew each other, actually. In October of 1978, he published his essay, The Power of the Powerless, and in 1979, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. There, he contracted pneumonia, and so he was set free on medical reasons, and he was, for the early 1980s, really very much surveilled and under a lot of pressure. In 1989, as I just let you know, he was a key player in the Velvet Revolution and eventually became the president of Czechoslovakia and then the president of the Czech Republic when the Czech Republic and Slovakia split. So, to tell us more about this figure, who he was, and what they were involved with, Mr. Martin Palous has joined us. He studied natural science, philosophy, and international law. He's president of the Václav Havel Library Foundation here in New York. He's also president of the International Platform for Human Rights in Cuba. And he is a senior fellow at the School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University in Miami. As already mentioned, he belonged to the group of original signatories of Charter 77. And he served as its spokesperson in 1986 and participated in the creation of Civic Forum in 1989. After the Velvet Revolution, he was a member of Parliament. He was the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs from 1990 to 1992, and then again 1998 to 2001. He was also the Ambassador of the Czech Republic to the United States from 2001 to 2005, and to the United Nations from 2006 to 2011. He's lectured at many universities in the Czech Republic and here in the United States, and he's the author of numerous publications in the area of political philosophy, international relations, and international law. And so please with me give a warm welcome to Mr. Martin Palous.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for such a flattering introduction. But not only that, I would like to thank organizers of this beautiful event because for their interest in Václav Havel, which means interest in our cause, our history of a small Central European nation, which is now part of a global community in the beginning of the 21st century. As it was said, right now, among other things, I'm president of Václav Havel Library Foundation. So our mission here is to preserve in all sorts of possible ways the Václav Havel's legacy. Having said that, I always have in mind the Václav Havel himself advice, please don't build a monument to me, but try to keep certain tradition that is connected with my life story alive. Let's focus on the past only as far as we need our guidance towards the future. So I certainly would love to do something like that today here with you. Václav Havel passed away slightly more than 2 years ago. So I'm seeing him around and I would like to start from his speech. Actually, you had one part of it described in your small, or quoted in your booklets. It was coincidence when I was preparing for this lecture. I took this speech myself because I happened to be in the one who prepared the first presidential trip of Václav Havel to the United States. It was in February of 1990. In the moment when the world was so bright and nice to us, we were on the winning side after so many years of difficulties. So let me to quote from this speech and end up with a sentence you have also already in your paper. The communist type of totalitarian system has left our nations a legacy of countless dead and unfinite spectrum of human suffering, profound economic decline, and above all, enormous human humiliation. It has brought horrors that fortunately have not been known to you. At the same time, however, unintentionally of course, it has given us something positive, a special capacity to look from time to time somewhat further than someone who has not undergone this bitter experience. A person who cannot move and live a normal life because he is pinned under a boulder has more time to think about his hopes than someone who is not trapped in this way. We must all learn many things from you, but it does not have to be merely assistance from the well-educated, the powerful, and the wealthy to someone who has nothing to offer in return. And that's the sentence you already have there. We too can offer something to you, our experience and the knowledge that has come out of it. So what is the topic of my short discourse here today is the Havel's experience, Havel's knowledge. I would like to make a couple of remarks about that. And first, just a word of warning. We are talking about hope, but if we can imagine the situation of Václav Havel in the moment when he was delivering this speech, he was kind of a triumphant person. someone who succeeded, who achieved something, and everybody was just looking at him with deep admiration. But if you look what Václav Havel said, and he kept saying that again and again about the hope, you hear slightly different tones. Hope, it's not a quotation, I'm just trying to remember that by my heart. Hope is not a kind of unshakable optimism. The things we do, we are up to, turn well for us in the end. Hope, rather, I would say hope beyond hope, is to keep doing things we consider right to do, even where there is no realistic chance for immediate success. This is actually maybe one of the most important Václav Havel's messages. To stay on your mission if you believe in it and don't be distracted by the adversities of time. I can give you another quote in this context by Jan Patočka, Czech philosopher. He was actually the professor. Václav Havel was, in his own terms, in his own way, his student too. This is what he had to say in 1973 in the heydays of normalization that was described here to a group of students I had the honor to be part of. In his lecture series, Plato and Europe, he started by saying, people trapped by a calamity are in different positions where they give up and where they don't. The man who is finding himself in a desperate situation still has different options how to behave. I think that these are important lessons, and maybe I will come to them in the end of that short conversation. Going back to the Václav Havel's intention, what he should be like to see as his legacy, and maybe guidance he was giving to us as an institution trying to do that, he said, to interpret through the medium of my life story, my public activities, the social processes in the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. To see through the life of Václav Havel, actually the world around us where we are. Václav Havel was an artist, he was a public intellectual, and he was later in his life a revolutionary leader and, let's say, world statesman. So let me start with Václav Havel, playwright, then to go to a human rights activist and then end up with statesman. Because I think all these three dimensions of Václav Havel's activities are deeply and intimately interconnected. It is not that you can separate Václav Havel, playwright, from Václav Havel, let's say, public intellectual, Socratic philosopher, if you want to say, and then Václav Havel, statesman. All these things have their internal, personal linkages for Havel, and I would dare to say that all they are leading us to the very core of our own civilizational identity. It says a lot to us who we are. When I was thinking how to present you Václav Havel as a playwright, he started as a young man in the theater on the balustrade, as it was said here, na zábradlí, in the 1960s.
That's how you say it.
Where he could enjoy a little bit and experiment with his own ideas about theater in the situation in which a little free space was open. And best thing that came to my mind just to present Václav Havel came from Shakespeare Hamlet. Because I think that Václav Havel really has some sort of Hamlet's expectations about theater. You for sure know this scene after Hamlet is examined by these two, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, maybe his public advisors, psychiatrist, consultants, and they just wanted to please him and they brought the actors to him, and that comes the Hamlet's idea. I think that genuine Václav Havel. I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. And then he says this crucial statement, play is the thing wherein I catch the conscience of the king. This is the connection between politics and conscience. The relationship between what people do in public and what they plot and think inside. And just if I was to use Shakespeare guidance, I cannot resist but go on with that, and because again I think that this is again Havel. There is something paradoxical in theater. Theater is very local by definition because it depends on language, on intimate communication between the theater play and the audience. Václav Havel in his writing always believed in theater. He was fascinated by this community of people that gets together for a limited period of time, for 2 hours, is exposed to a play, and that then might become out, changed a little bit, creating for a fleeting moment a community that really has experienced what living in truth means. What does it mean to be exposed to certain ideas? And again, what Shakespeare's Hamlet advised to the actors. Be not to tame neither, but let your own discretion to be your tutor. Suit the action to the word, and the word to the action. And with this special observance that you overstep not the modesty of nature, being aware that the purpose of playing whose end both at the first and now was and is, to hold as it were the mirror up to the nature, to show virtue her own feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time his form and pressure. I think that certainly there was something rotten, not only in Danish kingdom, but in Czechoslovakia in the 1970s. And time also was out of joint, and there was something to be done to set it right. And what Václav Havel could do as a public intellectual was maybe to start writing his texts. And he wrote this famous letter, Dear Dr. Husák, in which I think what is coming out is the concept of human rights that was then principle to form the community of Charter 77. When I say human rights and Václav Havel, there is something maybe a little confusing that should be clarified. We normally speak about rights as a list of entitlements, something what we have right to and what we should be respected in. I think that for Václav Havel, the idea of rights was connected with conscience and responsibility. I would use here Jan Patočka's definition from one of his last texts, because in that respect, Václav Havel was his student. The idea of human rights is nothing other than the conviction that even states, even societies as a whole, are subject to sovereignty of moral sentiment, that they recognize something unconditional that is higher than they are, binding, sacred, unviolable. Patočka speaks about this as truth of which we are all in some sense aware, but that need to be articulated in public. And that's what Václav Havel's essays are basically all about. Everybody here is asked to expose him herself to this strange question, admonition, and respond in her own way. Our common response, Václav Havel, Jan Patočka, and Jiří Hájek, who was a former foreign minister for 1968, were our three first spokespersons, was that we created this strange community of people that emerged in the middle of our normalized society of coordinated citizens. And what was at stake was to start looking for alternative ways how to live, alternative ways how to demonstrate to Dr. Husak, in the words of Václav Havel's letter, that there is something wrong in a society where people are forced to say things they don't believe they are truth and right in public, and maybe they have something else to say in their private spaces, as Václav Havel liked to say it, in their bathrooms. So Charter 77 in that respect was not a political institution, organization. If you believe that politics is a space where power and technology of power is what is at stake. But Charter 77 obviously was not living in a vacuum or in a ahistorical non-space, but in the context of the events that they were evolving in the 1970s and during the 1980s with us in Central Europe. So when time came to act, Václav Havel was the first who was, according to his advice to the Shakespeare's players, ready to say, please suit your action to the words and your words to your actions. And in this spirit, the revolution then came, and Václav Havel, kind of surprised, turned out or had to accept the role of the revolution's leader. If you read the end of the speech he gave in the US Congress, he says, look, you know, I didn't go to any school for presidents. I'm not trained, experienced for that, but I need to live up to this opportunity. I need to live up, and this is actually one of the dilemmas of Václav Havel, to the demands of the pure ethics of conviction on the one side and practical ethics of responsibility. Because already Charter 77 taught Václav Havel that it was not only his own role, but his relationship with others. The fact that there was a certain plurality of people around and out there. And then, and I'm going not to speak about that very much here, we discovered Václav Havel as a triumphant person. People who out of sudden became the president of state, became highly popular, with his ideas circulating in different forums, being turned from time to time even into cliches, and Václav Havel turning or being turned into monument he never wanted to be. I would like to end up my short intervention with this third element of Václav Havel's life story. Playwright, public intellectual, or Socratic philosopher, ready to act and admonish people, as Plato's Apology says, that the care for the soul is something for those who too much care for their power, glory, and money have a tendency to forget about. So when Václav Havel was statesman, he still had in mind, I think, his original role, and obviously the question of human rights and question of situation in the world that changed in 1989 dramatically, that changed in a way that the maybe resolution of East-West problem highlighted that there is another problem in this world, Europeans versus non-Europeans, South-North, people who have a direct relationship to certain tradition, maybe to universal human rights, and those who have not. And the question is, and the challenge, how to seek unity in this world of today. And let me end just giving you at least some feeling how Václav Havel was handling this situation. One page is missing here, but doesn't matter.
It's not there.
It's somewhere. I will just try to use my memory, and then I will end up here. It was again triumphant speech in the Council of Europe. in the situation. This is the place, Mecca of European human rights, and now the champion of human rights, Václav Havel, came there, and he was struggling with the following idea. What the universality of human rights means today. And obviously those who were part of that contract need to be bound by their presence and see their obligations here. But what about those who are not part of that original contract? It is binding for them too? Should we press on them? Or how shall we start? And that's what the Václav Havel's solution was. In reality, these starting points are much closer to one another than they now seem to be. The more cling we to the mere surface of things, the more otherness in diverse culture conceals the depth of affinity among them. The way to genuine universalism doesn't lead through compromises among various forms of otherness, but in a joint quest to bring back humanity's common primeval experience of the universe and of the human being within it. I think that this primeval experience of human being with the universe, not expressed in propositions, but as a search for that, as a quest, as the awareness that there are other people out there we are obliged to respect and show them our solidarity. This is, I think, the Václav Havel's beginning, which he always tried to begin in his place as a playwright, in his public activities as a dissident, as a human rights defender, as a prisoner of conscience, but also as a president, as a statesman. And now when he is not there anymore, I think that his legacy is still very alive with us, and Václav Havel's questions should be bothering us in the years to come, because the world does need these questions. Thank you.
That last song was from the Velvet Underground, and I think you saw a picture there of Lou Reed. Just to finish our gathering here today, this year's topic of the New York Encounter is From I to We, the time of the person, the origins of a people. And it's fascinating to think about Václav Havel and what Mr. Palous said today from this point of view, because what came clear in our little discussion and what Mr. Palous said is that Mr. Havel believed that the first responsibility we have is to ourself. In The Power of the Powerless, he talks about one's vital interests. Mr. Palous used the word conscience, responsibility to one's own conscience. But what's fascinating is that, again, as Mr. Palous said, that it is exactly this personal responsibility that leads one to discover people next to himself or herself living that same kind of responsibility. And this recognition of an engagement with the depth of our person leads us to find one another together in communion, as one of the slides said. And indeed, Mr. Havel talked about the foundation of a new polis, a new kind of space, public space, where a new life is lived by people engaged like this. And so, as Mr. Palous said to us before, the need in the world for this kind of human experience is not gone just because the Berlin Wall fell. Perhaps it's even greater than ever now. So thank you so much for being with us today.